They say after 20 years behind the wheel, nothing can surprise you. They're liars. I took a priority government contract, hauling a single black cube from a military base that doesn't exist on any map. The rules were simple: minus 20 degrees, no stops, absolute radio silence. Maybe it was just road hypnosis after 70 hours on the blacktop, but I swear I could feel a hum coming from that crate, a vibration that felt like a heartbeat. The dispatchers said it was impossible, but they weren't there when the reefer started failing and the frost crawling from the trailer doors turned black. You listen and tell me if I'm crazy. 22 years I've been hauling freight. Seen every sunrise you can imagine over the Rockies and every sunset that'll melt the paint right off your rig in the Mojave. I know the rhythm of the road. The hum of the Cummins ISX under the hood, the hiss of the air brakes, the chatter on the CB. It's the beat of my life. Most jobs are the same old song. Pick up in one concrete jungle, drop off in another. Dry goods, produce, machine parts, it's all just waiting miles. This job, though, this one started on a different key entirely. It came through a broker I'd done some work for before, a guy named Silas, who specialized in government overflow. Usually, that meant hauling decommissioned office furniture or surplus tents. Easy money. But this one was flagged priority red with a payout that could clear my mortgage. The instructions were delivered by a courier, not email. A sealed manila envelope containing a single sheet of paper with a set of GPS coordinates deep in the Nevada desert, a radio frequency, and a warning. Maintain absolute radio silence until instructed. No anophirais stops. Your rig must be in perfect working order. I got my Kenworth, the matriarch, prepped and ready. Fresh oil, new tires, reefer unit serviced, and humming like a contented cat. The coordinates led me off I-80 down a state highway that turned into a county road, which eventually dissolved into a packed dirt track that wasn't on any map I owned. For 50 miles, there was nothing but sagebrush and shimmering heat. Then, exactly where the GPS told me it would be was a gate. A 10-foot-high chain-link fence topped with concertina wire, stretching out of sight in both directions. No signs, no flags. Just a concrete guardhouse and a steel gate. I keyed the frequency. "This is Big Joe for a pickup," I said, feeling like an idiot using the handle they'd assigned me. The gate slid open without a word in reply. Inside was a world of sterile concrete and unnerving quiet. It wasn't a base so much as a bunker, a series of low, windowless buildings half buried in the sand. Men in flat, gray fatigues with no insignia moved with a chilling efficiency. They weren't soldiers, not like any I'd ever seen. They were more like technicians, or exterminators. They directed me to a loading bay that looked clean enough to perform surgery in. A forklift, driven by another one of the silent gray men, emerged from the dark maw of the building carrying a single, massive crate. It was a matte black cube, roughly 10 feet on each side, with no markings, no labels. They loaded it into my reefer trailer with practiced ease. One of them, a man with cold, dead eyes and a jaw that looked like it was carved from granite, approached my cab. He didn't hand me a bill of lading. He handed me a heavy-duty padlock and a single laminated card. "Destination is on the card," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any accent. "Temperature must be maintained at minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit. No lower, no higher. You will be monitored. Do not stop until you reach the primary transfer point." He locked the trailer doors, the clank of the steel echoing in the silence. Then he affixed a numbered, tamper-proof seal. Standard procedure, but this felt anything but. I did my walk-around, a habit ingrained deeper than my own signature. Checked the tires, the airlines, the kingpin. The reefer was already kicking on, blasting Arctic air to bring the box down to temp. Everything looked perfect, except, as I put my hand on the trailer wall, I felt it. A vibration. It wasn't the thrum of the Thermo King unit. I knew that sound intimately. This was a deeper, slower pulse. A low-frequency hum that seemed to resonate right in my bones. It felt organic. I chalked it up to whatever was inside settling. Some kind of weird machinery, maybe. I climbed into the cab, the worn leather of the seat a familiar comfort in this profoundly uncomfortable place. I logged the seal number, just like always. I glanced in my mirror as I pulled away, the gray men standing motionless, watching me go. The gate slid shut behind me, sealing me back into the real world. Or so I thought. As I eased the matriarch back onto that dusty track, picking up speed, the hum from the trailer changed. It deepened, the rhythm of its pulses seeming to quicken, to sync up with the RPMs of my engine. I looked at my reefer control panel. -20 degrees. Solid, but the feeling of dread was a cold lump in my gut. In my side view mirror, a glint of light caught my eye from the guardhouse, now a tiny speck in the distance. It was the sun reflecting off a lens. A pair of binoculars, pointed not at my truck, but specifically at the roof of my trailer. For the first hour, I tried to pretend it was just another run. I put on some old Waylon Jennings, cranked the volume to drown out the hum, and focused on the endless ribbon of asphalt unfolding in my headlights. Night had fallen hard and fast in the desert, the kind of deep, star-dusted blackness that makes you feel like the only man alive. But there was no peace in it tonight. The vibration from the trailer was a constant companion, a dissonant bass note under the familiar melody of the engine. It felt like I was hauling a giant tuning fork that had been struck once and would never, ever fall silent. My focus was on the destination card. It routed me east on a series of desolate back roads, a path clearly chosen to avoid population centers and way stations. Good. The last thing I needed was a curious DOT officer asking for a bill of lading I didn't have. My job was simple: keep the wheels turning and the box cold. And that's when the second crack appeared in my carefully constructed reality. A high-pitched beep cut through the music. I glanced at the reefer control panel mounted on the dash. The green light next to the dash 20-degree F readout was flashing amber. The temperature had crept up to -19. "Come on, you old so," I muttered, fiddling with the controls. I toggled the cycle from automatic to continuous. The massive diesel engine on the front of the trailer roared to life, a familiar sound that was usually reassuring. The temp dipped back down. For a few minutes, all was well. Then it beeped again. -18. This was my false explanation, my port in the storm of weirdness. The Thermo King unit was acting up. The matriarch was a solid rig, but she had her miles. Reefers were finicky beasts. It was a mechanical problem. I could handle a mechanical problem. I'd spent half my life nursing cantankerous equipment across the country. This was just another fight. For the next 100 miles, it was a constant battle. The temp would rise, I'd force it down. The compressor would kick on with a shudder that shook the whole cab, run for 3 minutes, then cut out for 10, a completely nonsensical cycle. The hum from the cargo seemed to grow stronger every time the reefer faltered, as if it were feeding on the warmth. I shut off the radio, needing total concentration. My world shrank to the glowing numbers on the dash, the white lines on the road, and the insistent, invasive thrumming in my spine. Then a small satellite phone on the passenger seat, one they'd included in the instruction packet, rang with a shrill electronic chirp. I grabbed it, my hand slick with sweat. "Yeah." I barked. It was the same dead, flat voice from the base. "Status report. Is the designated temperature being maintained?" The question was too specific, too knowing. They were monitoring me, just like they said. They knew. Panic flared hot in my chest, but my voice came out steady, a lifetime of dealing with dispatchers and brokers taking over. "Affirmative. Holding at -20. Everything's green." I lied. There was a pause, a few seconds of empty static that felt like an eternity. "Proceed to the transfer point. Do not deviate," the voice commanded, and the line went dead. The lie sealed it. I couldn't stop now. If I did, and they were watching, I'd lose the payout and probably end up in a world of hurt. But the reefer was losing. The temp hit -15, then -13. The air coming from my cab vents, which drew from the reefer's overspill, felt clammy, carrying a strange metallic odor, like ozone and spoiled meat. I had to do something. Against every instinct and every direct order, I spotted a small, gravel turnout overlooking a dark valley and pulled the rig over. I had to see the unit with my own eyes. I left the engine running, grabbed a mag light, and jumped down. The night air was cold, but the side of the trailer was colder. so cold it burned my fingers when I touched it. The vibration was immense now, a physical force pushing against my palm, like the flank of some enormous, breathing animal. I ran to the front of the trailer. The Thermo King was screaming, its fans spinning at maximum, but it was fighting a losing war. And then I saw the frost. It wasn't the clean white rime of a properly working freezer unit. It was a thick, black, oily frost crawling out from the seams of the doors and the vents of the reefer itself. It formed intricate, fractal patterns on the aluminum skin, branching out like veins or the circuits on a silicon chip. It looked like the trailer was freezing from the inside out with something alien. I stared, mesmerized and horrified. This wasn't a mechanical failure. This was something else. Something wrong. As I watched a single impossibly perfect flake of this black frost broke free. It was shaped like a tiny six-pointed star, but it glistened like polished obsidian. It drifted down through the beam of my flashlight, slow and unnatural, and landed gently on the back of my glove. I expected it to melt. It didn't. For a split second, it just sat there. Then, with a horrifying, deliberate motion, it began to unfold, its crystalline arms retracting and extending as it started to crawl across the fabric of my glove like a spider. My hand reacted before my brain did. A full-body flinch, a strangled yelp clawing its way up my throat. I shook my glove violently, trying to sling the grotesque crystal creature into the darkness, but it clung on with an unnatural grip. It felt like trying to shake off a drop of superglue. In a blind panic, I ripped the glove off and threw it to the ground, stomping on it with my steel-toed boot until I felt a definitive, sickening crunch. The sound was wrong. Not the soft squish of a bug, but the sharp crack of breaking glass. I stood there, panting, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The quiet of the desert night pressed in, suddenly feeling less empty and more watchful. I had to get out of there. The transfer point, the payout, the warnings, all of it faded behind a singular, primal urge to put miles between me and that trailer. I scrambled back towards the cab, but as my hand touched the door handle, I heard a sound that froze my blood. A soft, metallic snick from the rear of the trailer. I whipped my flashlight beam back towards the doors. The padlock I'd watched the gray man put on was lying on the ground. The heavy steel hasp, designed to withstand bolt cutters, had been snapped clean in two, the fractured metal gleaming in the light. I was backing away now, my feet crunching on the gravel, my mind screaming at me to run. The heavy steel bar that secured the doors began to lift, slowly, silently, moving with a purpose that defied gravity. There was no one there, no one lifting it. It just rose. It cleared the brackets, and then, with a low groan of stressed metal, the right side trailer door began to swing open. A blast of cold, foul-smelling air rolled out, a wave of palpable wrongness that carried the scent of ozone, ammonia, and something else, something sickly sweet, like rotting fruit and electrified metal. The deep, rhythmic hum from inside intensified, becoming a gut-churning throb that I could feel in my teeth. The reefer unit on the front of the trailer sputtered one last time and died, its sudden silence making the thrumming seem 10 times louder. The interior of the trailer was a pit of absolute blackness, a void that seemed to drink the beam of my flashlight. I was rooted to the spot, a spectator at my own execution. My training, my experience, 22 years of road sense, all of it screamed at me to get in the cab and drive. But I couldn't move. I had to see. I had to know what I was hauling. The door swung open further, revealing the edge of the matte black cube. It was no longer a perfect cube. The surface was different. It was covered in the same black, crystalline frost I'd seen outside, but here it was a solid, living sheath. It pulsed with a faint, internal blue light that seemed to beat in time with the thrumming. The perfectly machined corners of the crate were gone, replaced by curved, organic-looking growths. It looked less like a container and more like a chrysalis. That's when I lost it. I broke the paralysis, turned, and sprinted for the cab. I yanked the door open and threw myself inside, not even bothering to use the steps. My hand was on the ignition, ready to slam the rig into gear and leave that trailer sitting right there in the turnout. I didn't care about the contract or the silent men in gray. This was over. I was out. But as my fingers closed around the key, the cab lights flickered and died. The dashboard went dark. The low growl of the Cummins engine cut out abruptly, plunging me into a silence that was somehow more terrifying than the noise had been. I turned the key. Nothing. Not even a click. I tried the radio. Dead. The satellite phone on the seat? A blank screen. Every system, every circuit, every wire in the matriarch had been fried. I was in a 40-ton metal coffin, anchored to a nightmare that was currently hatching in my trailer. And from behind me, from that open trailer door, I heard a new sound. A wet, tearing noise, followed by the screech of metal being bent and ripped apart. The sound of rending metal from the trailer was the starting gun for a race I was already losing. My sanctuary, my home on wheels, was dead. The matriarch was just a tomb of steel and glass, and something was breaking out of the crypt I'd been paid to transport. My mind was a frantic scramble, trying to process the impossible. An EMP? Some kind of localized electrical pulse that had fried my rig? It was the only explanation that made any sense, but the source was undeniable. It came from the cargo, from a thing in the cargo. I grabbed the heavy mag light from the floor, its being the only light I had left. My knuckles were white where I gripped it. It was a pathetic weapon, but it was something. My gaze was locked on my passenger side mirror, which offered a distorted, terrifying view of the open trailer door. The tearing sound stopped, replaced by a series of wet, percussive clicks, like 1,000 pieces of chitinous armor slotting into place. The blue light pulsing from within the trailer intensified, casting long, dancing shadows out onto the gravel. This wasn't a hijacking. This wasn't some piece of advanced military hardware malfunctioning. The cold dread solidifying in my gut told me this was something far older, something that didn't obey the laws of physics as I knew them. The men in gray, they weren't trying to transport a weapon. They were trying to entomb a specimen, and I was the schmuck they'd hired to drive the coffin. The rules had changed. My world of DOT regulations, logbooks, and fuel stops was gone. The new rules were being written by whatever was in that box. Rule 1, it controlled the environment. It had killed my truck with a thought. Rule 2, it was intelligent. The slow, deliberate way it had broken the lock, opened the door, and disabled my rig. It was methodical. It was testing its cage, and now it was free. A shape began to emerge from the blackness of the trailer. It wasn't one shape, but many, a chaotic assemblage of parts that moved with a horrifying unity. The first thing I saw was a limb, if you could call it that. It was long and spindly, made of the same shimmering black crystal as the frost, but it moved with a fluid, insectoid grace. It tapped the gravel of the turnout, the sound sharp and clear in the dead silence. Then another appeared, and another. They weren't legs, they were probes, delicate and sharp, testing the air, the ground, the reality outside their prison. Then the main body began to pull itself into view. It was a writhing mass of black, crystalline structures and what looked like organic tissue, laced with pulsing blue veins of light. It was as if a supercomputer and a deep-sea jellyfish had been fused together in a teleporter accident. Geometric shapes, cubes, pyramids, dodecahedrons, grew and collapsed back into the fleshy parts, constantly reconfiguring the creature's body. It was building itself, evolving right there in front of my eyes. The 10-foot cube wasn't cargo, it was a seed, and the warmth, the failure of the reefer, had been the catalyst for its germination. It pulled its bulk fully out of the trailer, its weight making the whole rig groan. It stood in the turnout, a shifting monument of biological machinery, maybe 15 feet tall. There was no head, no eyes that I could see, but I felt its attention shift to me. A low-frequency hum emanated from it, vibrating through the frame of my truck, through the seat, and into my bones. It was a sound that felt like a question, a scan. It was assessing me. My survival instinct, buried under a landslide of sheer terror, finally kicked in. I had to move. I couldn't stay in the cab, a sitting duck. I needed distance. I quietly, so quietly I could hear the blood pounding in my ears, reached for the driver's side door handle. My plan was simple and suicidal. Get out, get into the desert, and hide. Let it have the truck. Let it have whatever it wanted. I just wanted to live. I eased the door open, the faint click of the latch sounding like a gunshot. The creature's shifting form immediately stopped moving. The blue lights within its body pulsed brighter, faster. The low hum it was emitting pitched up into a high-frequency shriek that vibrated the air. It knew. It had heard me. And as I looked into the side view mirror, I saw one of its crystalline limbs snap forward with impossible speed, not towards me, but towards the front of my truck. It slammed into the grill of the matriarch. The sound a deafening clang of metal on metal. But it wasn't an attack. It was a warning shot. Then, with the same deliberate precision, another limb shot out and wrapped around my front driver's side tire. The razor-sharp edges of its crystalline structure sinking deep into the rubber with a loud hiss of escaping air. It had just anchored me to my own damn rig. The hiss of the punctured tire was the sound of my last, desperate plan deflating. The creature had me pinned. It was playing with me, a cat with a cornered mouse, demonstrating its power, its control. It stood there, a shimmering black nightmare under the stars, its blue lights pulsing in a slow, steady rhythm, as if it was thinking. The shriek had subsided back to that low, bone-deep hum. It knew I wasn't going anywhere. Trapped in the dead cab, I was a fish in a bowl. My only option was to find help. The satellite phone was dead. My CB was dead. That left my cell. I fumbled in my pocket for it, my fingers clumsy with adrenaline. The screen lit up, a beacon of hope in the darkness. 1 bar of service. 1 pathetic flickering bar. It was a miracle. I didn't waste time with 911. What would I say? Hello, police. My truck was disabled by a geometric space monster. They traced the call and sent a wellness check in the morning, long after I was a stain on the asphalt. I had one number that might work. Silas, the broker. He got me into this mess. He was damn well going to get me out. His number was in my contacts under Silas Gov Contracts. My thumb hovered over the call button. This was a massive risk. The men in gray had demanded radio silence. Calling the broker was a direct violation of the one rule they'd been crystal clear on. But what choice did I have? Stay here and get disassembled by a living algorithm, or take my chances with the people who built it? I pressed the call button. It rang once, twice. My eyes were glued to the creature in my mirror. It remained motionless, but I could feel its attention, a palpable weight in the air. Yeah, a gruff voice answered. It was Silas. He sounded annoyed, like I'd woken him up. Silas, it's Joe. Big Joe, I said, my voice a harsh whisper. The priority red run. I have a situation, a major situation. What are you doing calling me on an open line, you idiot? He hissed. I told you, secure comms only. You're being monitored. The secure phone is dead. The whole rig is dead. The cargo. Silas, the cargo is out. It's out of the container. There was a dead silence on the other end of the line. Not a pause. A complete, terrifying void. For a second, I thought the call had dropped. Silas? Are you there? Joe, he finally said, his voice stripped of its earlier annoyance, now flat and cold, just like the man from the base. Where are you? Give me your exact location. I'm at the turnout I was supposed to stop at, then oh wait, I pulled over a few miles before it. I stammered, my hope giving way to a new kind of fear. His tone was wrong. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't panicked. He was procedural. About 5 miles west of the designated transfer point on Route 375. The reefer failed. I had to stop. Did you open the trailer, Joe? He asked, his voice dangerously calm. No, it opened itself. The lock, it broke. Silas, this thing, it's not a machine. It's alive. You have to send someone. Send the military. Send everybody. Stay in your cab, Joe, Silas said. The false comfort in his voice was more chilling than any threat. Help is on the way. A recovery team is already en route. They're about 20 minutes out. Just stay calm. Don't engage. Don't try to run. We'll handle it. Help is on the way. The words should have been a relief, a flood of warmth. Instead, an ice-cold certainty washed over me. He knew. He knew this could happen. A recovery team already en route? They weren't coming to save me. They were coming to clean up a mess. I was part of the mess. Silas wasn't an ally. He was a dispatcher for the zookeepers. "What is this thing, Silas?" I demanded, my voice rising. "That's above your pay grade, son. Just sit tight. Our team will secure the asset." He called it an asset. A living, breathing nightmare, and he called it an asset. The creature in the mirror shifted. One of its crystalline limbs retracted from my tire and began to slide slowly, deliberately, along the side of the cab towards my door. It was moving with a new purpose. It knew I had made contact. "They're not coming to help me. Are they, Silas?" I whispered into the phone. The only reply was the click of the line disconnecting. He'd hung up on me, and as the silence of the dead phone filled the cab, I looked down and saw the single bar of service on my screen blink out. Then a new icon appeared, one I'd never seen before. A small, perfect black hexagon in the center of the screen. The phone was no longer mine. It had been compromised. And through the driver's side window, I saw the tip of a razor-sharp, obsidian limb tap gently on the glass, right next to my face. The tap on the glass was delicate, almost curious. It wasn't the sound of aggression, but of examination. A scientist tapping on a petri dish. My heart, which had been trying to beat its way out of my chest, seemed to stop altogether. I was inches away from a piece of the creature, separated only by a quarter-inch of safety glass. Through the window, I could see the limb in horrifying detail. It was a fusion of biology and geometry, a smooth, black, obsidian-like material laced with flickering blue circuits that pulsed with soft light. It didn't reflect my terrified face. It seemed to absorb the light, a perfect sliver of the void. My trust in Silas had been my final, critical mistake. He wasn't a lifeline. He was the one who had tied the anchor to my leg. The recovery team was a threat, not a promise. They weren't coming to rescue the driver. They were coming to contain their asset, and I was a loose end, a witness who knew far too much. The creature outside and the men on their way. I was caught between two jaws of the same trap. My mind raced. 20 minutes. Silas had given me 20 minutes. It was either a lie to keep me placid, or it was the most terrifying truth I'd ever heard. I had to assume it was the latter. I looked from the tapping limb to the dead dashboard to the useless satellite phone and back to my own cell phone, now displaying that ominous black hexagon. It was a beacon. They were using my own phone to home in on my exact position. With a surge of defiant rage, I threw the phone. I didn't just toss it. I wound up and hurled it as hard as I could against the passenger side door, where it shattered into a dozen pieces. The black hexagon winked out. It was a futile gesture, I knew. They already had my location. But it felt like cutting a wire, a small act of rebellion against the faceless, indifferent machine that had sent me here to die. The moment the phone shattered, the tapping on my window stopped. The limb retracted. The creature shifted its massive, reconfiguring form. The blue lights inside it flared, and the low hum it emitted dropped into a subsonic frequency that rattled the fillings in my teeth. It was reacting to my action, to the destruction of the tracking device. A new thought, cold and sharp as broken glass, cut through my panic. What if the creature and the recovery team were not on the same side? I had assumed they were its keepers. But what if they were its enemies? What if it saw them as a greater threat than me? The enemy of my enemy. It was a desperate gamble, a drowning man's prayer, but it was all I had. I had to reposition the board. Right now, I was the target for both sides. I needed to become irrelevant. I needed to make the truck the prize, not me. My only hope of escape was to get away from the rig before the recovery team arrived and the real fireworks started. I looked at the limb that still had my front tire pinned. If I was going to get out, I had to go out the passenger side. I slid across the worn leather seat, my movements slow and deliberate. I didn't want to spook it again. My hand reached for the passenger door handle. The creature remained still, its attention seemingly fixed on the road, in the direction from which the recovery team would be coming. Was it listening? Could it sense them? I took a deep breath and opened the door. The latch clicked, and the creature's form twitched, but it didn't move towards me. Its focus was elsewhere. I swung the door open and dropped to the ground, landing hard on the gravel, my ankles screaming in protest. I stayed low, scrambling on my hands and knees away from the cab, putting the massive bulk of the engine block between me and the creature. My plan was to crawl past the front of the truck and make a break for the deep ditch on the other side of the road, then melt into the sagebrush and darkness of the valley below. I peeked around the front bumper. The creature was still facing away from me, a shimmering black monolith against the stars. Its limbs were tensed, its blue lights pulsing erratically. It was waiting. This was my chance. I rose to a crouch and sprinted. My boots crunched loudly on the gravel as I crossed the empty lane of the highway. 10 feet to the ditch. 5 feet. I was about to throw myself over the edge into the relative safety of the darkness when a sound split the night. It wasn't the creature. It was the high-pitched whine of turbines. I looked up the road and saw them. 2 sets of headlights, moving impossibly fast, flanking a larger, darker shape in the middle. They weren't trucks. They were sleek, military-style vehicles, and they were closing the distance with silent, terrifying speed. The recovery team was here, and just as I dove for the ditch, I saw the creature react. Its entire body seemed to flex, and from the top of its shifting, geometric mass, a dozen smaller, crystalline shards, each the size of a dinner plate, detached and shot into the air. They hovered for a moment, catching the starlight like black diamonds, before they turned and accelerated down the highway towards the approaching headlights, moving faster than any drone I had ever seen. They were interceptors, and they were going to war. I hit the bottom of the ditch hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me. Gravel and dry weeds scraped my face as I flattened myself against the earth, peering over the edge of the asphalt. The night had erupted. The world was no longer silent. It was filled with the scream of turbines and a high-frequency energy hum that made the air itself feel like it was vibrating. The 2 sleek escort vehicles and the larger, armored transport in the middle screeched to a halt about 200 yards down the road from my rig, forming a defensive semicircle. Their headlights cut brilliant, sterile cones of white light through the darkness, pinning my truck and the creature in a stark tableau. This wasn't a recovery team. This was a containment force. Men in matte black tactical gear, their faces obscured by full coverage helmets, poured out of the vehicles. They moved with the same chilling, silent efficiency as the men at the base. They didn't carry conventional firearms. They wielded strange, bulky rifles with large, cylindrical coils at the muzzle. The crystalline shards the creature had launched met the strike team head-on. There were no explosions, no gunfire. As the shards closed in, the men in black raised their weapons, and beams of what looked like pure electrical energy, crackling and white-hot, lanced out to meet them. The air sizzled. Where the beams struck the shards, there was a violent discharge of blue and white light, a sound like a thunderclap and a firecracker going off at the same time. Most of the shards were obliterated in mid-air, shattering into a million pieces of glittering dust. But 2 of them got through. They didn't slam into the vehicles. They were more precise than that. One shard dove down and sliced through the front tire of an escort vehicle with a loud bang. The other banked sharply and embedded itself in the center of the armored transport's windshield. The glass didn't shatter. It crazed over with a network of black, fractal lines that spread out from the shard like ice on a pond. The vehicle's engines sputtered and died. The creature had just crippled their heavy transport with a single shot. I realized then that this town, this road, this whole desolate stretch of Nevada wasn't just a route. It was a cage, a carefully prepared kill zone. The Bayside picked up from, the empty roads, the pre-planned transfer point. It was all part of a massive, mobile containment field. I hadn't been a driver. I'd been the bait, dragging a lure through a trap. Now that the lure was broken and the quarry was loose, the hunters had arrived. This lonely turnout wasn't a sanctuary. It was the heart of the abattoir. The men in black adapted instantly. Half of them formed a perimeter, their energy weapons creating a crackling fence of light around the scene. The other half advanced on my rig, moving in pairs, their steps synchronized. The creature, in turn, began to change. Its body contracted, its geometric surfaces folding inward as it became denser, more compact. The soft blue lights within it hardened to a brilliant, angry sapphire. It lowered its center of gravity, its spindly limbs digging into the asphalt, anchoring itself. It was preparing for a direct assault. I needed to get further away. I started to crawl backwards down the ditch, the loose rock sliding under my hands. Every instinct told me to disappear into the valley, but a horrifying thought stopped me cold. What if this whole area was rigged? What if the desert floor was seeded with sensors? What if the real cage wasn't the road, but the entire valley? Leaving the immediate area of the fight might be what triggered a final, lethal response. My gaze swept the scene, desperate for an out, for some detail that didn't fit. And then I saw him. One of the black-clad soldiers had broken from the formation. He wasn't advancing on the creature. He was moving methodically along the edge of the road, sweeping the ditch with a handheld device. My ditch. He was looking for me. The black hexagon on my shattered phone might have been their primary tracker, but they had redundancies. They weren't just here for the asset. They were here to sanitize the scene. And I was the last piece of trash they needed to take out. He was getting closer. His helmeted head swiveled back and forth, the optical sensor on his gear glowing a faint red. He was maybe 50 yards away, then 40. I was out of time. I couldn't run, and I couldn't hide. The soldier raised his hand, pointing directly in my position, and shouted something to his comrades. It was inaudible over the hum of the energy weapons, but the meaning was clear. I was found. As two more soldiers broke off and started jogging towards the ditch, towards me, the creature made its move. It didn't charge the main force. With a sound like tearing granite, it ripped a massive piece of asphalt from the roadbed with one of its limbs and, with impossible strength and accuracy, hurled it not at the soldiers, but directly at the cab of my truck. The slab of asphalt, the size of a manhole cover, hit the cab of the matriarch with a devastating boom. Metal shrieked and glass exploded. The passenger side door, where I had just been sitting minutes before, was crushed inward as if by a giant's fist. The entire rig rocked violently on its suspension. It wasn't a random act of destruction. It was a tactical decision, a diversion, and it worked. Every head in the containment team, including the 3 advancing on my position in the ditch, snapped towards the wreck of my cab. For a split second, their attention was completely focused on the source of the new damage. That split second was all the creature needed. It uncoiled with blinding speed, a torrent of black, crystalline limbs, and shimmering, organic tissue. It didn't charge the main line of soldiers. It moved laterally, a black tide flowing across the highway, directly towards the 2 escort vehicles on the flank. I was forgotten. The soldiers who had been jogging towards me were now scrambling back, shouting unheard commands, trying to pivot their energy rifles to track the creature's explosive movement. They were too slow. The creature slammed into the first escort vehicle, the one with the shredded tire. It didn't use brute force. It was terrifyingly precise. Limbs like obsidian scalpels sliced through the vehicle's frame, severing hydraulic lines and wiring harnesses. Other appendages, tipped with what looked like glowing blue capacitors, attached themselves to the hull. The vehicle's remaining lights flickered violently and died as the creature drained it of all power, absorbing the energy into its own body. My mind, battered by fear and adrenaline, was starting to fray at the edges. The sheer wrongness of it all was overwhelming. The silent, faceless soldiers, the impossible physics of the creature, the feeling of being a pawn in a game whose rules were beyond my comprehension. It was all grinding me down. My body screamed with exhaustion. I've been awake for nearly 24 hours, running on cheap coffee and pure terror. My thoughts were becoming sluggish, my reactions delayed. I knew I had to use the diversion to escape, but my legs felt like lead. I managed to push myself up, stumbling further down the ditch, away from the firefight. The sounds were a nightmare symphony. The crackle of energy weapons firing ineffectually against the creature's hide, the shriek of tortured metal, the deep, resonant thrum of the creature itself, which seemed to be getting stronger with every vehicle it disabled. I risked a glance back. The creature had dismantled the first vehicle and was now swarming over the second. The soldiers had fallen back into a tight circle around the crippled transport, their energy beams creating a cage of searing white light. But the creature wasn't attacking their position. It was ignoring them. It seemed to be harvesting. It was systematically taking apart their technology, draining their power sources, analyzing their hardware. With every piece of equipment it assimilated, its own blue-lit circuitry seemed to glow brighter, its movements becoming faster and more complex. This was the source of my growing desperation. It was learning. It had started as a seed in a box, hatched, learned how to kill my truck, and now was learning how to defeat military-grade hardware in real time. The longer this fight went on, the more powerful it would become. I had to get away. I forced my exhausted body into a clumsy, stumbling run, staying low in the ditch. I put about 100 yards between me and the battle. The sounds grew slightly fainter, but the flashes of light still illuminated the desolate landscape in strobing, unnatural bursts. I was so focused on escaping, so overwhelmed by fatigue, that I didn't see it until it was too late. A thin, almost invisible wire stretched taut across the ditch at ankle height. My boot caught it. I pitched forward, my arms pinwheeling uselessly as I fell. My head struck something hard, a rock half buried in the dirt, with a sickening crack. My vision exploded in a flash of white, then swam with black spots. Dazed, my skull ringing like a bell, I tried to push myself up. That's when I heard the click, and then another, and another, all around me in the darkness of the ditch. The wire wasn't a tripwire. It was a trigger. I had stumbled into a minefield. Not explosives. Something worse. A series of small, cylindrical projectors, now revealed, popped up from the ground around me, each one aimed directly at my position. They were part of the cage, a secondary perimeter, and I had just activated it. I was on my hands and knees, my head throbbing, my world a dizzying mess of pain and confusion. The projectors that encircled me were silent, menacing. Each one was a small, black cylinder about the size of a coffee can, with a single, unblinking blue lens on top, now glowing faintly. They were pointed at me, creating a lethal perimeter about 15 feet in diameter. The tripwire hadn't armed a bomb. It had activated my own personal prison cell. My blood ran cold. This was the true nature of the trap. It wasn't just the road, it was the whole damned valley. A layered, intelligent system designed to contain and, if necessary, eliminate anything that moved. I was now sectioned off, isolated, a bug in a jar waiting for the lid to be screwed on tight. My momentary advantage, the diversion the creature had created, was gone. I was pinned down, more exposed, and helpless than I had been in the cab of my truck. Looking back toward the firefight, I could see the battle had shifted again. The creature had finished with the escort vehicles. It was now larger, its form more complex. It had integrated pieces of the wrecked vehicles into its own body. Sheets of black ballistic plating now armored its fleshy parts, and the glowing coils from the soldiers' rifles were embedded in its limbs, pulsing with stolen energy. It had not just destroyed their technology, it had assimilated it. It had upgraded itself. The remaining soldiers, seeing their weapons were now ineffective against the creature's enhanced form, changed tactics. They fell back, tossing canisters that erupted in clouds of thick, white smoke. But it wasn't smoke. Where it touched the ground, the sagebrush instantly withered and died, turning black as if flash frozen. It was some kind of chemical agent, a cryogenic fog designed to embrittle and shatter the creature's crystalline structure. The fog rolled towards the creature, a slow-moving wave of absolute zero. The creature, in turn, reacted instantly. The stolen coils on its limbs began to glow with intense heat, projecting a shimmering field of thermal energy around its body that vaporized the fog before it could make contact. It had anticipated their attack and already developed a countermeasure. This was the bottom, the absolute rock-bottom moment of my life. I was trapped in a technological cage, my head bleeding, my body shaking with exhaustion. To my left, an alien life form that was evolving at an exponential rate. To my right, a team of faceless super soldiers armed with weapons from a sci-fi movie. Both sides wanted this patch of desert sanitized, and I was the final stain. There was no escape, no plan. Hope was a foreign concept, a memory from another lifetime. All that was left was the animal certainty of my own impending death. I slumped against the dirt wall of the ditch, the fight draining out of me. Let them come. Let the creature finish its work and then come for me. Let the soldiers decide I was too much of a risk and activate these projectors. I closed my eyes, the throbbing in my skull a dull, rhythmic drumbeat counting down my final seconds. And then I heard a new sound beneath the chaos of the battle. It was faint, coming from the wreck of my truck. A familiar electronic beep. A pattern. Beep, 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 beep. It was Morse code. SOS. My eyes snapped open. It was impossible. The matriarch was dead, her systems fried, her cab a mangled wreck. But the sound was undeniable, cutting through the din. I looked toward my rig. The dashboard was dark. The cab was still a ruin. The sound wasn't coming from my radio. It was coming from the trailer, from the empty, black, 10-foot cube that the creature had hatched from. The source of all this horror, the prison itself, was broadcasting a distress signal. Beep, beep, beep. It was clean, precise, and utterly insane. For a moment, I was sure the rock I'd hit had rattled something loose in my skull. I was hallucinating sounds now, my dying brain manufacturing a last, cruel joke. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to make it stop, but the signal persisted, a tiny, rhythmic pinprick of order in a world of screaming chaos. It was real. Slowly, painfully, I pushed myself up onto my elbows, my head swimming. The circle of blue lens projectors remained fixed on me, a silent promise of annihilation if I made a wrong move. I peered through the darkness towards my mangled rig. The signal was faint, but its source was unmistakable. The empty black cube inside the trailer. My whole understanding of the night fractured and reassembled itself in a blinding flash of insight. The terror that had paralyzed me for hours was suddenly replaced by a cold, terrifying clarity. I had been wrong about everything. The men in gray, Silas, the containment team, they hadn't lied, not exactly. They had just omitted the most important detail. The creature, the black crystalline monster currently tearing their forces apart, was not the asset. It was never the asset. It was a contamination, a parasite, a biological hijacker. The real asset was the crate, or rather, what the crate was supposed to be holding. Everything clicked into place. The reefer, -20 degrees. It wasn't to keep some monster dormant. It was a quarantine protocol, a firewall. It was meant to keep the parasite, the black frost, in a state of crystalline hibernation, preventing it from hatching and infecting the true cargo. When my reefer failed, the temperature rose. The frost thawed, activated, and consumed its host. The cube wasn't a prison that had been broken out of. It was a cocoon that had been corrupted from the outside in. The vibrations I'd felt weren't the monster. They were the last struggles of whatever was inside. I looked back at the battle with new eyes. The soldiers weren't just trying to destroy the creature. Their tactics were suddenly legible. The energy weapons weren't powerful enough to obliterate it, but maybe they were tuned to a frequency that could disrupt the parasite without harming the host it had integrated with. The cryogenic fog wasn't just to make it brittle. Maybe it was a last-ditch effort to reinduce the state of hibernation, to freeze the corruption in place. They weren't trying to kill it. They were trying to perform an exorcism with lightning guns and cryo grenades. And they were failing. The SOS was a cry for help from the original prisoner, the real asset, the flicker in the dark. It was still alive in there, a ghost in the machine, a consciousness buried under layers of parasitic crystal and stolen technology. It was fighting back in the only way it could, with a tiny, desperate pulse of energy. My situation hadn't changed. I was still trapped, still marked for death. But the equation was different. I wasn't a meaningless loose end anymore. I was the only person on this battlefield who understood the truth. And in that truth, I saw a sliver of a chance. A terrible, suicidal chance. The containment team saw the creature as one entity. They didn't know its core was compromised, that it had a divided consciousness. They were fighting the shell, unaware of the prisoner rattling inside. This was its weakness, the conflict within. The SOS wasn't just a signal. It was an expenditure of energy. a drain on the creature's own resources. Maybe, just maybe, I could use that. I looked at the projectors that held me captive. They were part of the cage, designed to contain the monster. They were likely networked, keyed to its energy signature and movements. As I watched the creature tear a piece of armor plating off the transport vehicle, the blue lenses on the projectors around me flickered in unison, recalibrating, tracking the massive shift in energy. They were reactive, dependent on the creature's actions. That meant they could be predicted. They could be fooled. A plan, born of pure desperation, began to form in my mind. It was a bank shot off a prayer, a gamble with odds so long they were invisible. But it was better than sitting in a ditch waiting to die. My terror hadn't vanished, but now it had a purpose. It was fuel. I wasn't going to run from the chaos anymore. I had to run back into it. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the cold desert air burning my lungs. I had to get to the trailer. I had to get to that cube. I didn't know what I would do when I got there, but I knew, with an instinct that went deeper than thought, that it was the only move left on the board. The projectors were a death sentence, but they were also a pathway. Their reactive nature was a flaw in the cage, a flaw I could exploit. I watched the monster rear back, preparing to hurl the piece of armor at the soldiers. The blue lenses of the projectors around me dimmed for a fraction of a second as they prepared to track the coming energy spike. It was my window. I wasn't running from my prison anymore. I was using its bars as rungs on a ladder back into hell. The moment the creature began its throwing motion, coiling its assimilated limbs, I moved. The blue lights on my captor projectors flickered, their focus momentarily shifting to anticipate the massive energy release from the creature's attack. It was just as I gambled. For that 1/10 of a second, their target lock on me was weakened. I didn't sprint. I lunged, a single, explosive movement to the right, diving parallel to the ditch, not out of it. An angry red beam of energy sizzled through the air where my head had been, incinerating a sagebrush and turning the sand beneath it to glass. The shot was a fraction of a second too late. I hit the ground, rolled, and came up in a low crouch, my heart trying to claw its way up my throat. I was out of the kill zone. The projectors reset, their lenses swiveling, but they didn't fire again. Their protocol was likely to contain, not pursue. I was free in my immediate cage, but now I was back in the open, a soft target in a war zone. My objective was clear: the trailer, the cube, the source of that desperate, repeating SOS. I stayed low, using the ditch for cover as I scrambled back towards the epicenter of the chaos. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and the cryogenic fog, a smell that clung to the back of my throat. The soldiers were falling back again, forming a new defensive line further down the road, giving the creature a wider berth. They were losing, their faces, visible now behind their cracked and damaged helmet visors, were etched with grim disbelief. They had come here to contain an asset and had found a god. The creature, for its part, seemed to ignore me completely. My energy signature was a flickering candle next to the bonfire of the containment team's weapons. I was beneath its notice. This was the core of my plan. I was banking on its arrogance, on its complete focus on the larger threat. I reached the rear of my trailer, my hand touching the cold, familiar metal. The doors were still wide open, a gaping maw leading into darkness. The SOS signal was stronger here, a clear, rhythmic pulse I could feel in the frame of the trailer itself. I pulled myself up, my muscles screaming in protest, and peered inside. The matte black cube sat in the center of the trailer floor, surrounded by the debris of its own hatching, shards of crystalline material and torn pieces of the original container. The SOS was definitely coming from it. A single, tiny point of red light, no bigger than a pinprick, was blinking on its surface, right in the center of one of its faces. It was a manual override, a physical access point, a hidden keyhole. This was the final gamble. The creature was a parasite that had consumed its host, but the host, the original asset, was still fighting, still trying to signal for help. If I could somehow amplify that signal, if I could give the host a surge of power, maybe it could fight back more effectively. Maybe it could disrupt the parasite from the inside, creating the opening the soldiers needed, or better yet, the opening I needed to get the hell out of here for good. But how to give it power? My truck was dead. The military vehicles were drained. Then my eyes fell on one of the bulky energy rifles, dropped by a soldier during the retreat. It lay on the asphalt, not 20 feet from my trailer. Its coiled barrel was dark, its power cell likely depleted, but not completely. There had to be some residual charge left. It was suicide. I'd have to leave the relative cover of the trailer, expose myself completely, retrieve the weapon, and somehow figure out how to hotwire a futuristic gun to a mysterious alien cube before the creature or the soldiers decided to vaporize me. I took one last look at the battle. The creature was raising another piece of wreckage, preparing for another volley. This was it. Now or never. I waited for it to begin its attack, for the inevitable flicker in the attention of every combatant on the field. As it began to move, I vaulted out of the trailer, my boots hitting the asphalt with a loud slap. I sprinted for the rifle. My whole world narrowed to that single objective. I scooped it up. It was heavier than it looked, dense and cold, and scrambled back towards the trailer. I got 2 steps before a voice, amplified and robotic, boomed through the chaos. Cease your actions. Step away from the asset. It was the soldiers. They'd seen me. A red targeting laser painted a dot right on my chest. I froze, caught in the open, the rifle in my hands. The creature, its attack aborted, slowly turned its massive, horrifying form towards me. The humming intensified, and every blue light on its body fixed on me. I was no longer beneath its notice. I had touched a piece of its enemy's technology. I had picked a side, and now I had the undivided attention of both. For one heartbeat, the entire battlefield was still. The soldiers had me in their sights, the creature had me in its gaze, and I stood between them, a terrified man holding a dead piece of future tech. The red laser down my chest was an anchor, pinning me to the spot. The creature's hum deepened, a resonant thrum of inquiry and threat. It took a step towards me, its assimilated armor plating scraping against the asphalt. It saw the rifle in my hands, recognized it, and understood my intent as a profound betrayal. I had seconds. My mind, clear as a bell in the face of absolute doom, worked faster than it ever had before. The soldier's warning, step away from the asset, wasn't about me. They were still talking about the creature. They hadn't understood. They didn't see the blinking red light. They didn't hear the SOS. They were about to shoot me to protect the very thing that was trying to kill them. With my left hand, I pointed frantically, desperately at the blinking red light on the cube inside my trailer. Not that! I screamed, my voice raw and cracking. This is the asset. It's asking for help. The soldiers hesitated. The leader, his helmet's visor spiderwebbed with cracks, tilted his head. Confusion. My words were a piece of data that didn't fit their model. But the creature didn't hesitate. It saw my gesture, saw my communication with its enemy, and it committed to my destruction. It lunged, not with its full body, but with one long, whip-fast limb, the tip of a razor-sharp obsidian point aimed directly for my heart. In that final, frozen moment, the soldier made a choice. He didn't shoot me. He retargeted. Fire! He yelled, and a storm of white energy beams lanced out. Not at me, but at the attacking limb. The beams converged, striking the limb mid-flight. It didn't shatter. Instead, the obsidian material glowed white-hot, then molten, dissolving in a shower of incandescent blue sparks less than 10 feet from my face. The creature shrieked, a sound of pure electronic rage and agony, and recoiled. That was my window. I ignored the soldiers, ignored the reeling monster, and threw myself back into the trailer. I scrambled to the cube, the heavy rifle clutched in my hands. I didn't know how it worked, but I knew machines. Power source, conductor, output. I smashed the butt of the rifle against the cube's smooth surface, then tore at the weapon's casing, trying to expose the power cell. My fingers found a release latch, and a heavy, cylindrical battery pack came free. It had connection points, positive and negative terminals, glowing faintly. I jammed the positive terminal against the blinking red light. Nothing. It needed a complete circuit. I looked at the cube. There were no other connection points. But the entire cube had been inside a metal container, which was now in pieces around me. I grabbed a jagged shard of the original container, a piece of conductive metal, and jammed it against the cube surface. Then, I touched the battery's negative terminal to it. The result was instantaneous and violent. The battery pack discharged its entire remaining energy in one massive surge. A blinding arc of blue electricity leaped from the battery to the cube, and the entire trailer was illuminated in a flash of light. The cube didn't just absorb the energy, it drank it. The tiny red SOS light exploded into a brilliant white beam that shot out from the cube and struck the creature, still reeling from the soldier's attack, square in its center mass. The creature convulsed. The parasitic black crystal fought back, its blue lights flaring in a furious, chaotic frenzy. But the white light from the cube, the pure signal of the original asset, held firm. It spread through the creature's body like a virus, traveling along the very circuits the parasite had created. Black, crystalline structures began to crumble, turning to dust. The stolen military hardware sputtered and short-circuited, falling from its body in smoking pieces. The creature was being erased from the inside out, with one last, deafening shriek that was a mixture of organic pain and electronic static. It imploded, collapsing in on itself, until all that was left was a pile of black dust and shattered components on the asphalt. Silence. The sudden, total absence of the hum was the loudest thing I had ever heard. The soldiers stood frozen, their rifles lowered. I was on my knees in the trailer, shaking, covered in grime and sweat. The black cube was no longer black. The parasitic shell had fallen away. It was now a smooth, pearlescent white, humming with a soft, steady, internal light. It looked clean. Pure. The soldiers advanced slowly, cautiously. Their leader stopped at the open trailer doors, looking from the pile of dust on the road to the white cube and then to me. He raised his cracked visor. He was just a man, young, with terror and all warring in his eyes. He keyed his comms. Containment is successful. The asset is secure. But there's a civilian. He's the one who did it. There was a long pause. He was listening to a voice I couldn't hear. Silas, maybe, or someone much higher up. Finally, he looked at me, a strange mix of gratitude and profound regret in his eyes. They're on their way, he said. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. They never told me what it was. I spent 3 weeks in a hospital with no windows, then 6 months in a debriefing facility that was more comfortable than a prison, but no less secure. They asked me the same questions 1,000 times. I told them the truth every time. They took the matriarch, of course. Said she was evidence. I never got the payout. I don't drive anymore. My nerve is gone. Sometimes late at night, when the house is quiet, I can still feel that hum in my bones. They gave me a new name, a new life, a pension that's more than generous. They said it was for my trouble, but I know what it really is. It's silence money. They want me to forget I was the man who drove the hearse for a parasite, and then for a few terrifying minutes held the spark that jump-started a ghost. They think the cage they've built for me, this quiet suburban life, is secure. But I know about cages, and I know that sometimes, even from the deepest, darkest silence, you can still hear a call for help. And I know something is still out there in a white box waiting, and I know, sooner or later, someone's gonna have to haul it again. End of story.